Daniel Cross had never thought much about the colored stakes that sometimes popped up in suburban lawns. Usually they were harmless. Utility crews marking underground lines, or kids pulling a prank. But when he found 3 bright orange stakes hammered neatly into the grass behind his swing set, aligned in a perfect rectangle, his gut tightened. This wasn't random. Someone was surveying his backyard. He crouched to inspect the stakes more closely. Each was tagged with a small laminated card. They weren't from the city. Instead, they bore the stamp of the Homeowners Association. A black logo, an eagle wrapped around the words, North Glen Community Association. The message beneath was short and cryptic. Parcel 17. Reassignment pending. Daniel walked inside, clutching one of the stakes like a weapon. His wife Linda was grading papers at the kitchen island. She looked up when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she asked. He placed the stake down between her coffee mug and the stack of math quizzes. "They're in our yard again," he said. "This time, they marked it like they're taking it." Linda frowned, sliding her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "The hole? What for? We pay our community fees on time. We don't even use the clubhouse anymore." Daniel shook his head. "It's not about late fees. It says something about reassignment. They can't just reassign part of our backyard." That evening, he pulled up the HOA portal on his laptop. Buried inside the announcements was a new document, uploaded only 2 days earlier. "Amendment to Common Area Allocations," it read. He scrolled past the legal jargon until his eyes caught a familiar line. Lot 42. "Rear parcel reassigned to Community Trust for development purposes." Lot 42 was his. His backyard wasn't being shared. It was being taken. The next day, Daniel showed up at the HOA office inside the clubhouse. The receptionist gave him the kind of tired smile reserved for people who ask too many questions. "I need to speak with Alden Pierce," Daniel said firmly. Minutes later, Alden emerged from a glass-walled conference room. Tall, tanned, with a Rolex glinting on his wrist, the HOA president always looked more like a corporate executive than a neighbor. "Daniel," he said warmly, "what can I do for you?" Daniel held up the printout of the amendment. "This. Why is my backyard suddenly reassigned? What development purposes? And why wasn't I told before orange stakes showed up in my grass?" Alden's smile never wavered. "It's nothing personal," he said smoothly. "The association voted to repurpose underutilized land for community benefit. The parcel behind your home has been under review for months." Daniel blinked. "Underutilized? My kids play back there every day. It's not under anything. It's ours. The deed says so." Alden's eyes flickered, then settled into practiced calm. "Actually, Daniel, that's where it gets interesting. The HOA holds easement rights over the subdivision's rear setbacks. Technically, the association can repurpose them if it serves the greater good. It's all in the covenant you signed when you bought the property." Daniel felt heat rising in his chest. He'd signed plenty of papers during closing, but nobody told him the HOA could carve up his backyard like it was a pie. "Greater good for who?" he snapped. Alden placed a hand on his shoulder, rehearsed sympathy etched into every line of his face. "For the community, and for you. In fact, there's compensation involved. You'll see a credit toward your HOA dues soon. It's a win-win." Back home, Daniel spread out his deed, survey map, and the HOA's amendment side by side on the dining table. Linda hovered nearby, her arms crossed tight. "Doesn't make sense," she muttered. "The lot lines on this survey show the yard belongs to us outright. How can they sell what isn't theirs?" Daniel rubbed his temples. "They didn't say sell. They said reassign." But the wording gnawed at him. Reassignment sounded like corporate code for something worse. 2 nights later, while taking out the trash, Daniel noticed a white pickup parked across the street. 2 men in reflective vests were unloading equipment. Tripods, lasers, rolls of neon tape. Surveyors. They weren't city employees, and they weren't wearing HOA logos either. When Daniel asked who they were working for, one man shrugged. "Private client. We're just here to map parcel 17. His stomach dropped. They weren't just marking lines. They were preparing to sell. The following morning, Daniel stormed back to the clubhouse. He cornered Alden again, this time with Linda at his side. "Private contractors were in my yard last night," Daniel said, voice trembling with fury. "They told me parcel 17 was being mapped for sale. Who's the buyer?" For the first time, Alden's polished mask cracked. His smile twitched, then returned. "Daniel, I think you're misunderstanding. These are routine steps. Nothing is finalized." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Then tell us exactly who hired them." Alden glanced around the empty lobby, lowered his voice. "Look, this isn't something I can discuss openly. But since you're pressing, yes, there is outside interest. A firm made an offer. The association decided it was in everyone's best interest to move forward. The funds will cover maintenance, legal reserves, even lower dues. You'll thank us later." "Nonce." Daniel leaned forward, his fists clenching. "What firm?" Alden hesitated. Then he said it casually, like dropping a pebble into a pond. "Meridian Capital." The name meant nothing to Linda, but Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He worked in data analytics for a bank. He knew Meridian. They weren't local developers. They were a hedge fund. And hedge funds didn't buy backyards unless they had a plan to squeeze them dry. That night, Daniel dug through financial news articles, LinkedIn profiles, and real estate filings. He found a recent press release. Meridian Capital launches Suburban Fractional Housing Fund II, targeting $1.20 billion in acquisitions. The language made his blood run cold. Meridian was buying suburban parcels, subdividing them, and repackaging them into investment products for Wall Street. His backyard wasn't just land, it was becoming a financial instrument. When he told Linda, she stared at him in disbelief. "They're selling pieces of our yard to Wall Street. That's insane." Daniel shook his head grimly. "Not just ours. If they've got one parcel, they've probably got more. The whole neighborhood could be collateral." Outside, the glow of the surveyor's neon tape gleamed faintly in the moonlight, marking a future he didn't agree to. On Friday morning, an unmarked black SUV rolled slowly down their cul-de-sac guy. Daniel watched from the window as it stopped in front of his house. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. He didn't approach the door. He just looked at the backyard, made a few notes, then returned to the SUV. Linda joined Daniel at the window. "Who was that?" she whispered. Daniel didn't answer. He already knew. Meridian Capital wasn't just interested. They were here. That evening, Daniel heard a knock on his door. When he opened it, a glossy envelope lay on the porch. Inside was a letter, printed on heavy stock paper with Meridian's logo at the top. It read, "Notice of transition. Parcel 17 has been successfully reassigned to Meridian Capital Holdings. You are hereby advised to restrict access to this area effective immediately." At the bottom was a smiling signature. Elliot Drake, Vice President of Community Acquisitions. Daniel stood frozen on the porch, the letter trembling in his hand. Behind him, Linda's voice cracked. "Restrict access? That's our yard, Daniel. They're telling us not to set foot in our own yard." He looked back at the orange stakes glowing faintly under the porch light, forming a boundary that no longer belonged to him. His backyard wasn't his anymore. It belonged to Wall Street, and Meridian Capital wasn't going to stop with just one parcel. The letter from Meridian Capital sat like a brick on the dining table. Daniel had read it 5 times, each word heavier than the last. Linda hovered in the kitchen, arms crossed, jaw tight. "So what now?" she asked. "Do we call the police?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "And say what? That a hedge fund stole our backyard? They'll wave the HOA covenant in our faces and tell us it's a civil issue. This isn't trespassing. It's legal theft." All day Saturday, Daniel noticed the shift in the neighborhood. 2 houses down, surveyors were driving fresh stakes into another lawn. Across the street, the Johnsons had a notice taped to their front door. "Reassignment pending. Parcel 18B. He watched Mrs. Johnson tear it down and stomp it into the ground, while her husband muttered curses under his breath. The subdivision was turning into a patchwork of neon markers and angry homeowners. By evening, Daniel decided he needed answers from someone besides Alden Pierce. He walked over to his neighbor Maria Velasquez's house. Maria was a single mother with 2 young kids who often played in the cul-de-sac. She was also known for clashing with the HOA over everything from parking permits to holiday decorations. If anyone had dirt, it would be her. She answered the door in sweatpants, her dark hair tied up, eyes tired. "You saw the stakes too, huh?" she said before Daniel could speak. Inside, Maria shoved a stack of papers into his hands. "They reassigned part of my lot last month," said the kid's swing set was on community property now. "I called a lawyer. Guess what? He laughed and told me I'd signed away those rights at closing. Said the HOA can do whatever they want with common-use parcels. But here's the kicker. My mortgage lender never mentioned anything like that. Which means the HOA is playing both sides." Nice. Daniel flipped through her documents. The signatures, the stamps. They looked legitimate, but the language was slippery. Parcel use rights subject to community reassignment if deemed beneficial. A clause buried on page 67 of her purchase contract. "You're telling me they've been planning this since the beginning?" Maria leaned forward, her voice sharp. "I'm telling you they sold us out, and now some hedge fund is carving up our backyards like cattle for slaughter." On Monday morning, Daniel called his bank. After 20 minutes on hold, he finally got through to a representative in mortgage servicing. He asked point blank if they knew anything about Meridian Capital acquiring parcels in his subdivision. There was a pause, then a too careful answer. "We can confirm that certain adjustments to property boundaries have been noted in the system. Your loan remains secured, but please understand that reassigned parcels do not impact the primary line." Daniel pressed harder. "So you knew this was happening?" The rep cleared their throat. "Sir, I'm not at liberty to comment on client investment strategies." Then the line went dead. That night, the HOA held a special meeting in the clubhouse. The parking lot overflowed with angry homeowners. Inside, Alden Pierce stood at the front like a politician at a rally, microphone in hand, a projector behind him showing slides of smiling families and buzzwords like community growth and financial security. Daniel and Linda squeezed into the back row, while Maria waved from the corner, already red-faced with frustration. Alden began his pitch. "We understand change is difficult, but Meridian Capital is investing in us, in our future. Their funding will stabilize our reserves, lower dues, and enhance amenities. We're talking about a new pool, upgraded security, even fiber internet across the subdivision. All at no cost to you." The crowd erupted in shouts. "At no cost?" someone yelled. "You took our land." Another homeowner shouted. "My deck is now in their parcel line. How is that a benefit?" Alden raised his hands for calm. "I assure you, all homeowners will receive appropriate credits. And remember, property values increase when communities show fiscal strength. Meridian is here to take from us. They're here to partner with us." Daniel stepped forward, his voice cutting above the din. "Partner? They sent me a letter telling me not to step foot in my own yard. That's not partnership, that's theft." Murmurs spread quickly through the room. Before Alden could respond, a new voice filled the air. Smooth, confident, laced with charm. "I believe I can clear up some misunderstandings." All heads turned as a man in a tailored suit walked in. His hair was perfectly combed, his smile disarming. He carried a sleek leather briefcase embossed with gold letters, Meridian Capital. "My name is Elliot Drake, Vice President of Community Acquisitions, and I want to assure you, Meridian is your friend." The room fell silent as Drake took the stage. He projected warmth like a seasoned salesman. "I know this feels sudden, but Meridian specializes in unlocking hidden value for neighborhoods like yours. Think of these parcels as underutilized assets. By fractionalizing and securitizing them, we create liquidity that benefits everyone. Imagine, lower fees, higher home values, and access to capital improvements you could never afford alone." Daniel felt bile rise in his throat. "Fractionalizing, liquidity. We're not stocks, we're families. Drake's smile didn't waver. And that's exactly why we want to help you. The housing market is shifting. Traditional mortgages are outdated. Fractional housing ensures stability in uncertain times. We're protecting you from volatility. Maria shot up from her chair, pointing an accusing finger. You're protecting your investors, not us. Drake's tone cooled just slightly, though the smile stayed. I understand your concerns, but this is progress. Those who embrace it will thrive. Those who resist, he let the sentence trail off, letting the implication hang. Daniel locked eyes with him, recognizing the veiled threat. This wasn't about community. This was about profit. After the meeting, Daniel pulled Maria aside in the parking lot. He's not just buying land, Daniel said. He's packaging it, turning it into securities. That's why they don't care about us. We're just lines on a spreadsheet. Maria lit a cigarette with shaking hands. So what do? We can't outspend a hedge fund. Daniel's mind raced. Maybe not with money. But if they're operating through the HOA, then they're hiding something. We just need to find it. Later that week, Daniel received another envelope. This time, it wasn't from the HOA or Meridian. It was plain, with no return address. Inside was a single page, printed in courier font. Check county records. Bulk transfer deed. April 12th. Buyer, Meridian Capital Holdings, LLC. Seller, North Glen Community Association. His pulse quickened. Someone wanted him to know the HOA had already sold more than just his backyard. They had sold the entire subdivision in one secret deal. He rushed to the county recorder's office the next morning. After a tense wait, a clerk slid a thick file across the counter. There it was in black and white. The HOA had executed a bulk transfer deed, selling hundreds of tiny parcel rights, including setbacks, easements, and common strips, to Meridian Capital for $18.60 million. The deal covered every single home in North Glen. His backyard was only the beginning. Daniel sat in his car, gripping the file, hands trembling. Meridian wasn't experimenting. They'd already swallowed his neighborhood whole. Every neighbor, every lawn, every fence line was now part of a Wall Street investment portfolio. And judging by the speed of the surveyors, they weren't planning to stop here. North Glen was just one tile in a much larger mosaic. He looked at the last page of the deed, where a signature curled elegantly at the bottom. Alden Pierce. His own HOA president had sold them out. As Daniel stared at the papers, a shadow fell across his windshield. He looked up. A man in a dark suit stood outside his car, sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. He tapped the glass once, slowly, then pointed at the file in Daniel's lap. With a thin smile, he mouthed the words, "Put it back." Me. Daniel's pulse pounded as the man in the suit tapped his windshield again. The sunglasses reflected Daniel's own pale, frightened face. He clutched the deed file tighter, then forced himself to breathe. If he looked scared, he'd already lost. Slowly, he cracked the window open an inch. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice strained. The man leaned close, his cologne sharp and overpowering. "Some things don't belong in your hands," he said softly. "Put it back where you found it and we won't have a problem." Daniel swallowed hard. "This is public record. I have every right to it." The man's smile widened, but his eyes stayed cold. "Rights are a funny thing. On paper, sure, but papers can get lost. People can too." With that, he straightened, tapped the glass one last time, and walked away. The black SUV idled across the lot, waiting. Daniel didn't move until the man climbed in and the vehicle disappeared down the street. Back home, he spread the bulk deed across the dining table. Linda gasped when she saw the total. $18.60 million. "They sold us all," she whispered. "Every single one of us." Daniel nodded grimly. "This isn't about one backyard. Meridian owns slices of every property now. Easements, setbacks, drainage strips, even playground corners. It's like they've turned the neighborhood into a giant chessboard, and we're the pieces." Maria came over an hour later, her kids in tow. She glanced at the document and let out a bitter laugh. "Figures. I knew Alden was crooked, but 18 million? That's more than this whole neighborhood is worth. Daniel shook his head. Not when you securitize it. Meridian isn't playing real estate, they're playing Wall Street. They'll package these parcels into bonds, sell them off, and make triple what they paid. And when the market tanks, we'll be the ones holding the bag. The next morning, Daniel woke to the sound of drilling. He ran outside to find contractors in neon vests anchoring metal posts into his yard. One of them handed him a laminated notice. Access restricted. Authorized by Meridian Capital. Daniel tore it up in front of them. "This is my property," he shouted. The worker shrugged. "Take it up with your association." By noon, a chain-link fence stretched across the middle of his lawn, cutting off his kid's swing set. Linda pulled the curtains shut, tears streaming down her face. That night, a neighborhood meeting formed on Maria's porch. Half a dozen families huddled close, whispering like conspirators. The Johnsons were furious, the Wangs terrified, and Mrs. Powell clutched her rosary as if prayer could keep Meridian at bay. Daniel laid out the deed for all to see. Gasps rippled through the group. "So it's true," Mrs. Johnson whispered. "They've already sold us." Maria slammed her fist on the railing. "Then we fight back." A younger neighbor, Evan, shook his head nervously. "Fight how? These guys have lawyers, money, private security? What do we have? PTA meetings and bake sales?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. "We have leverage. If Meridian's packaging these parcels into securities, then their entire scheme depends on stability. Investors don't like headlines about homeowners revolting. If we go public, we can wreck their image. No one will buy a bond backed by angry suburban families." Maria lit another cigarette, nodding. "So we blow the whistle. Media, regulators, whoever will listen." The Johnsons looked skeptical. "And what if they come after us?" Daniel glanced around at the frightened faces. "They already have. The question is whether we let them finish the job." Over the next week, Daniel and Maria dug deeper. They found that Meridian had already set up a complex web of shell LLCs to disguise ownership. North Glen parcels had been funneled into Ang Asset Trust, then sliced into tranches with names like Suburban Growth Fund and Community Equity Series. Daniel explained it to the neighbors in layman's terms. "They've turned our yards into stocks, and every hedge fund in New York is buying shares." Linda stared at the diagrams spread across their dining table. "But what happens if those stocks crash?" Daniel rubbed his temples. "Then the securities default, and because they're tied to our property, lenders could declare technical defaults on our mortgages. Even if we never missed a payment, we could lose our homes." The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, the neighbors understood the stakes weren't just fences and lawns. They were fighting for their very roofs. 2 days later, Daniel returned from work to find a plain envelope stuck under his windshield wiper. Inside was a single photo. His family eating dinner through the kitchen window. No note, no explanation, just proof that someone had been watching. He showed it to Linda, her face going pale. "They're trying to scare us," she whispered. Daniel set his jaw. "Then it's working. But that doesn't mean we stop." Maria managed to connect Daniel with a contact at a local investigative news outlet. They arranged a secret meeting in a coffee shop downtown. The reporter, a wiry man with restless eyes, listened carefully as Daniel laid out the bulk deed and the financial trail. "This is big," the reporter said finally. "Wall Street carving up the suburbs. That's front-page material." But then his gaze shifted nervously toward the window. "Problem is, I'll need hard proof of fraud. Selling easements isn't illegal if it's in the covenant." Daniel leaned in, lowering his voice. "Then we get proof of corruption. Alden Pierce didn't pocket $18 million for the community pool. Where did the money go?" The reporter nodded slowly. "Follow the money. That's always the trail." He handed Daniel a burner phone. "Call me if you find anything. Don't use your own line." That night, Daniel scoured the HOA's financial disclosures. On the surface, everything looked ordinary. Maintenance budgets, landscaping costs, petty cash for seasonal events. But buried deep in the reserves account was a transfer marked simply as special allocation. The amount, $2.40 million. The recipient, AP Consulting LLC. Daniel froze. App, Alden Pierce. Their president had carved off a personal slice of the deal. He showed Maria the next morning. She whistled low. Gotcha, you bastard. Daniel nodded grimly. If we can prove he enriched himself, that's criminal. Embezzlement, wire fraud. Regulators will tear him apart. Maria's eyes gleamed with determination. Then we leak it. The reporter will eat this alive. But, Daniel hesitated. Not yet. If Meridian finds out we're onto them, they'll shut everything down. We need more. Something that ties the hedge fund directly to Pierce. Later that week, Daniel attended another HOA meeting, this time with a hidden recorder tucked in his jacket pocket. Alden stood at the front, smoothing his tie, ready to spin another fairy tale about community partnerships. But halfway through, Daniel caught it. The slip. Alden mentioned personal consulting fees negotiated with Meridian's leadership. Daniel's heart pounded as the recorder blinked red in his pocket. He had him. Proof of collusion, spoken aloud. That night, Daniel uploaded the recording to the burner phone and texted the reporter. Got it. Pierce admitted to personal payments. Next step? Minutes later, the reply buzzed in. Meet me tomorrow, 8 a.m., courthouse steps. We'll go to the state attorney together. Daniel felt a rush of hope for the first time in weeks. Finally, they had a way to fight back. But hope was fragile. At dawn, Daniel pulled into the courthouse parking lot. The reporter wasn't there. Instead, 2 police cruisers blocked the entrance. Officers milled around, whispering urgently. Daniel parked and approached cautiously. One officer held up a hand. Lot's closed, sir. Daniel glanced past him and froze. A white sheet lay on the courthouse steps, covering a body. A recorder, identical to the one Daniel had used, lay shattered on the ground nearby. Daniel staggered backward from the courthouse steps, bile rising in his throat. The white sheet fluttered faintly in the morning breeze, and he didn't need anyone to tell him what was underneath. The reporter was gone, silenced before he could blow the whistle. His recorder, smashed on the pavement, was a warning, one meant for Daniel too. He turned, forcing himself to walk calmly back to his car. Eyes followed him. Police, bystanders, maybe even Meridian's people. He knew better than to linger. If he looked too long, he might never walk away. At home, Daniel locked every door and closed every curtain. Linda gripped his arm, panic etched into her face. What happened? You're white as a ghost. He pressed a trembling finger to his lips, pulled her into the pantry, and whispered. They killed him. The reporter. It was staged as an accident, but it wasn't. Linda covered her mouth, stifling a scream. Oh God. Daniel, we have to leave. Take the kids and go. He shook his head. If we run, they win. And they'll still own this neighborhood when we're gone. Maria stormed in an hour later, face red, eyes wild. She had already heard whispers online. An investigative journalist falling at the courthouse steps. She slammed her fist on the table. That was no accident. That was a message. We're next. Daniel showed her the recording he had captured at the HOA meeting. Alden's words, clear and undeniable. Personal consulting fees, negotiated with Meridian's leadership. Maria's jaw tightened. That's it. That's our bullet. Daniel shook his head. It's not enough. If we go public with just this, they'll bury us under lawsuits. We need financial trails, wire transfers, bank accounts, something the SEC can't ignore. For days, Daniel buried himself in research. He requested HOA statements through legal loopholes, cross-referenced with corporate filings from Delaware, Cayman Islands, and Bermuda. What emerged was a dizzying lattice of shell companies, each masking the next. AP Consulting LLC funneled into Clarion Advisors, which funneled into an entity called Meridian Global Structures. Billions moved through accounts like shadows across a wall. Daniel highlighted one transfer in particular, $2.40 million routed through a New Jersey bank into an account labeled Perceive. Maria pointed at it. That's Pierce. Has to be. He's laundering his cut. Meanwhile, Meridian's grip tightened. More fences went up, cutting through backyards and playgrounds. Contractors poured concrete footings in common areas, as if preparing for permanent barriers. Families whispered about black SUVs cruising the cul-de-sacs at night, engines idling too long. One morning, Mrs. Paddle's garden was ripped out, replaced overnight by survey stakes. She wept openly in the street while her neighbors watched, powerless. The message was clear. The land no longer belonged to them. Linda found Daniel at the table one night, his laptop open, a spreadsheet glowing on the screen. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling. "You're going to get yourself killed," she whispered. "They're already watching us." Daniel looked up, exhaustion hollowing his face. "I don't have a choice. If we don't fight, they'll take everything. Our home, our equity, our children's future. They're turning us into tenants in our own lives." Linda knelt beside him, clutching his hands. "Then promise me one thing. If it comes to life or death, you'll choose us." He couldn't promise. He just kissed her forehead and went back to work. Maria suggested something reckless, hacking into the HOA president's personal accounts. Daniel recoiled at first. Crossing into illegality would destroy their credibility. But when Maria produced a flash drive with leaked bank passwords from an anonymous online source, his resolve cracked. Late one night, he plugged it into his laptop, sweat dripping down his back. With trembling fingers, he accessed Pierce's email. Hundreds of messages spilled across the screen, most routine. But then he found it. Correspondence with Meridian executives, explicitly detailing kickbacks. Subject line, "Your retainer fee." The attachments showed spreadsheets of payouts totaling over $5 million. Daniel's breath caught. This was the proof they needed. Before he could copy the files, a warning flashed on the screen. Unauthorized access detected. Session logged. Daniel yanked the drive out and shut the laptop, heart hammering. Maria cursed under her breath. "They know. You tripped an alarm." He rubbed his face with shaking hands. "Then we don't have long. We move now." The next morning, Daniel left for work, but noticed a black SUV trailing him. He changed lanes, doubled back, ran 2 stop signs. The SUV stayed with him, patient, deliberate. Finally, he pulled into a crowded strip mall and sprinted inside, weaving through shoppers until he slipped out the back entrance. He hid it in an alley, chest heaving, waiting. Minutes later, the SUV rolled slowly past, windows tinted, never stopping. They weren't even printing anymore. They wanted him to know he was marked. Maria convinced Daniel to take the files to a trusted lawyer she knew from her days working at a title office. His name was Howard Klein, old, weary, but incorruptible. In his dusty downtown office, Daniel laid out the documents, the recording, the spreadsheets. Howard adjusted his glasses, his eyes narrowing as he skimmed. "This is dynamite," he muttered. "Embezzlement, racketeering, securities fraud. If this hits the right desks, Pierce and Meridian are finished." He looked up, deadly serious. "But if you're carrying this, you're walking with a target on your back. They'll burn you before they let this go public." Howard agreed to prepare a package for the state attorney's office, but urged Daniel to lay low in the meantime. "No phone calls, no emails, no digital trail. Keep your head down." Daniel nodded, though his gut told him it was already too late. That night, Linda woke to find him staring out the window, a baseball bat clutched in his hands. The swing set sat eerily silent under the moonlight, the chain-link fence slicing through the yard like a scar. "They're out there," he whispered. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, trembling. 2 days later, Howard's office was ransacked. Desks overturned, file cabinets gutted, hard drives missing. Police called it a burglary, but Daniel knew better. The package was gone. Maria showed up at Daniel's doorstep in tears. "They're erasing us, one by one." Daniel clenched his fists, rage boiling. "Then we go bigger. Forget the state attorney. We take this federal." Maria stared at him. "FBI?" He nodded. "If anyone can crack this, it's them." But the risk escalated instantly. The very night they agreed, Daniel's phone buzzed with a new text from an unknown number. "Last warning. Your wife drives home at 5. Accidents happen." His blood ran cold. He yanked Linda and the kids into the car and drove them to a motel an hour away. They huddled in the dim room, curtains drawn, the kids confused and scared. Linda clutched his hand all night, her eyes wide and sleepless. He had crossed the line now. There was no turning back. The following morning, Daniel found a manila envelope slid under the motel door. Inside was a foreclosure notice, stamped with their bank seal. Effective immediately, their mortgage had been restructured under terms of Meridian Securities package. Payments had doubled. Failure to comply would result in seizure within 60 days. Linda broke down, sobbing. "They're taking our home already." Daniel stared at the notice, numb. Meridian had reached into their lives and twisted the knife deeper. He realized then that this was more than intimidation. It was war. And war demanded allies. That night, Daniel and Maria gathered the neighbors once more. The Johnsons, the Wangs, Mrs. Paddle, even terrified Evan. Daniel laid the foreclosure notice on the table. "It's happening to me today. Tomorrow, it'll be you. They're not just stealing land. They're weaponizing our mortgages. They'll bankrupt us and buy back our homes for pennies." The neighbors erupted, voices overlapping, fear mixing with fury. Daniel raised his hand. "We can't fight them as individuals, but together as a bloc we're powerful. We can shut down their deal if we stand united." The air was electric with both terror and hope. Neighbors exchanged glances, nods. Maria lit another cigarette, her hands trembling. "Then let's do it. No more hiding. We take the fight to them." Daniel looked around at the faces of families ready to risk everything. For the first time, he saw not just fear but resolve. He straightened, feeling the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders. "All right," he said. "Then tomorrow, we go public." But as they dispersed into the night, headlights flared at the end of the street. A caravan of 3 black SUVs rolled slowly down the block, engines rumbling, windows opaque. One stopped directly in front of Daniel's house. The driver's window rolled down just enough to reveal a pale hand holding a pistol, tapping it against the doorframe. Then the convoy drove off, leaving silence heavier than any words. The neighbors froze in their doorways, hearts pounding. They all knew what it meant. The next move would decide who lived, and who lost everything. The neighborhood was no longer quiet. Curtains stayed drawn, porch lights flickered through the night, and families whispered instead of waved. Everyone felt the SUVs before they even appeared. The convoy returned each evening, rolling slowly through the cul-de-sac like wolves circling prey. Daniel barely slept, clutching the baseball bat by the bed. Linda refused to let the kids play outside, their swing set abandoned behind a chain-link scar. Fear had become part of the landscape, but fear wasn't enough to stop them. Daniel gathered the neighbors in his garage, a map of the subdivision pinned to the wall with pushpins and red yarn. "They've bought our yards. They're slicing us into securities," he said, his voice steady. "But if we stand together, we can block their next move. They need silence. We give them noise." Maria lit another cigarette, her hands shaking but her eyes blazing. "Then we go public. Social media, live streams, press. If they kill one of us, the whole world sees it." Mrs. Patel raised a trembling hand. "But the bank notices. They're already foreclosing." Daniel nodded grimly. "That's why we exposed the scheme. They've weaponized our mortgages, bundled them into junk securities. If regulators catch wind, they'll rip Meridian apart before they collapse the market. We don't just fight for our homes. We fight to stop the next housing crisis." His words hung heavy in the musty garage, but they sparked something. Purpose. Families exchanged nervous nods. For the first time, they weren't just victims. They were soldiers in a suburban war. The next morning, Daniel and Maria set their plan in motion. Maria's teenage son rigged a live stream setup in Daniel's living room, cameras angled to cover the HOA clubhouse. At noon sharp, they streamed live to the internet. "Wall Street is stealing our homes." Within minutes, hundreds of viewers tuned in. By the hour mark, thousands. Neighbors testified on camera. Mrs. E. Patel holding up foreclosure notices, the Johnsons showing survey stakes splitting their yard. Daniel held up the bulk deed, his hands shaking but his voice clear. "They sold us all, and they're coming for more." It went viral overnight. News stations replayed clips of families crying on their porches, fences cutting across lawns, homeowners waving foreclosure letters like battle flags. Twitter exploded with hashtags. #backyard heist, #Wall Street land grab, #HOA corruption. By dawn, national anchors were discussing North Glen subdivision as the canary in the coal mine for predatory real estate finance. Daniel stared at the screen in disbelief. Their little cul-de-sac was now a battleground for America's soul. But exposure brought danger. 2 days later, Daniel returned home to find his front door ajar. Inside, furniture was overturned, drawers emptied, photos smashed on the floor. On the wall above the fireplace, someone had spray painted in red, "Silence or grave." Linda collapsed into sobs. Daniel clenched his fists. "They're scared," he muttered. "That means we're winning." But in truth, his stomach twisted with dread. He knew this war had only escalated. Regulators finally stirred. The viral storm forced the Securities and Exchange Commission to open a preliminary inquiry. Daniel received a call on the burner phone from a federal investigator. "We saw your live stream. We need documents, every piece you've got. But be careful. They'll try to destroy evidence before we move." Daniel arranged to meet at a secure location, but as he hung up, he caught movement outside the window. A man in a suit, standing in the shadows, watching. When Daniel blinked, he was gone. Maria urged speed. Together they copied files to encrypted drives, distributing them among trusted neighbors. "If they take one of us, the rest carry on," Maria said, her voice low. Evan, the nervous neighbor, finally found his courage, clutching a flash drive like a weapon. "I'm in. I'm not letting them bulldoze my home." For the first time, Daniel saw fire in Evan's eyes. Fear had transformed into defiance. Then came the climax. The HOA called an emergency meeting, announcing it as a final resolution for community stability. The clubhouse parking lot overflowed with cars, news vans, and black SUVs. Daniel walked in with the bulk deed under his arm, neighbors flanking him like an army. Alden Pierce stood at the front, tie perfect, smile razor sharp. Beside him, Meridian's liaison, Elliot Drake, polished as ever, exuding calm menace. Cameras rolled as Alden spread his arms. "We are here to assure you that everything is under control." Daniel stepped forward, voice steady but loud enough to cut through the murmurs. "You mean under your control? You took bribes. You sold our land to hedge funds. You lied to your neighbors." Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel held up the recording device, Alden's voice playing. "Personal consulting fees negotiated with Meridian's leadership." The room erupted. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust into Alden's face. For the first time, his smile faltered. Elliot Drake stepped in, his tone icy but controlled. "This community belongs to Meridian now. These arrangements were perfectly legal. Your neighbors will benefit from modernization and increased property values." Daniel's rage boiled over. "Modernization? You're turning our homes into stocks. And when the bubble bursts, families lose everything while you walk away richer." Applause broke out from the neighbors, a wave of defiance crashing against corporate power. Cameras captured every second. The confrontation spiraled. Maria hurled a folder of bank statements onto the table, documents spilling everywhere. "Here's your proof," she shouted. Reporters snapped photos. Regulators scribbled notes. Alden's face drained of color. Elliot Drake leaned close to him, whispering furiously. Daniel watched as panic rippled across the board members. The facade was crumbling, live on television. But Meridian struck back. Suddenly, the lights cut out. Panic erupted in the dark. Screams, shouts, the shuffling of feet. Daniel felt a hand shove him hard. He stumbled, clutching the deed, as glass shattered somewhere nearby. A flashlight beam cut through the chaos. Maria, her face set with determination. "They're trying to destroy the evidence," she shouted. Daniel clutched the bulk deed to his chest. If they lost it now, everything was gone. Sirens wailed outside. Police flooded in, followed by federal agents and windbreakers. "Sec, step aside!" The command rang out. Officers pushed through the panicked crowd, flashlights sweeping. Within minutes, Alden Pierce was in handcuffs, his face pale and sweaty. Elliot Drake slipped toward the back, but 2 agents caught him by the arm. The cameras caught everything: the arrests, the evidence, the collapse of Meridian's suburban empire. Daniel stood frozen, heart hammering. Against all odds, they had done it. The fallout was swift. News outlets called it the backyard heist. Federal indictments followed: fraud, embezzlement, racketeering. Meridian's bond packages collapsed overnight, triggering a tremor on Wall Street, but saving thousands of families from foreclosure. Daniel's name appeared in headlines, hailed as the whistleblower who stopped a national crisis before it could explode. Neighbors shook his hand with gratitude, calling him a hero. Maria grinned through her exhaustion. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." But victory carried scars. Daniel's home was still slashed by a chain-link fence, his mortgage in limbo, his family traumatized. Linda sat on the porch swing weeks later, staring at the sunset. "We won," she whispered. "So why doesn't it feel like it?" Daniel sat beside her, the weight of everything pressing down. "Because they'll rebuild," he said softly. "There's always another scheme, another Pierce, another Meridian. We stopped this one, but the system, they'll try again." One evening, Daniel checked the mail and found a thin envelope with no return address. Inside it was a single sheet of paper, typed in plain font. "Congratulations on your victory. Enjoy it while it lasts, ED." He froze, the initials burning into his mind. Elliot Drake had walked free, or at least his reach still extended beyond bars. Daniel looked up at the quiet street, the shadows lengthening across manicured lawns. The war wasn't over. It had only shifted to a darker battlefield. And as he tucked the letter into his pocket, Daniel realized the chilling truth. He hadn't just fought to save his backyard. He had declared war on an empire. And empires never fall quietly.